Hello, folks. Well, across America there are these widely known iconic landmarks, from the Statue of Liberty in New York, Independence Hall, Philadelphia, Golden Gate Bridge, California. We have another place that fits the list. After our one day here, there, down south in Nebraska, we have moved north to our 38th state, South Dakota. And it's a state so renowned for one attraction that it is called the Mount Rushmore State. That's right, where we are is so iconic that South Dakota decided to name itself and give it the nickname after this famous monument. Now, just like all the other states in the US, South Dakota is known for a handful of things itself. What comes to mind for you all when you hear of South Dakota? Well, obviously you might think of South Dakota associated with the amazing Mount Rushmore that we'll see in better detail without the trees in front of it. You may also think of South Dakota as a relatively sparse populated area. You'd be correct. There's not much population there. The eastern half is populated by a lot of farming communities, and in the west there's a lot of ranching communities. You might think of the South Dakotan Badlands, a rugged set of terrain in the western part of the state where, well, the lands are bad. You might also think of the Native American heritage here in South Dakota, the Lakota, Dakota, Sioux, Arapaho people. They all inhabited the lands of South Dakota. You might think of, well, its counterpart. Do they have a rivalry, these states, North Dakota and South Dakota? I'm not too sure, but if I were a South Dakotan, I'd probably have a lot of pride for my state. Aside from Mount Rushmore behind us, is there anything else that you can think of that you would associate with the state of South Dakota? Anyway, let's actually talk about this attraction. On the western edges of South Dakota are the Badlands and the Black Hills. Now, the Black Hills have long been a sacred area for the native people here. As the Americans showed up around the early 1900s, they figured, hey, you know what? Let's put the image of 4 presidents here in homage to the legacy that they have contributed to American history and culture. Now we're glimpsing at a close-up. This is the closest one can get to the actual faces of Mount Rushmore. We see all 4. Washington, Jefferson, Roosevelt, and Lincoln. And they were all chosen to be carved on this mountain for various reasons, but they all, in one way or another, were presidents who contributed to this nation. So here we go. We got Washington, number 1, 1789 to 1797. He was the first president. He was the commander of the Continental Army, which brought the U.S. to victory after the Americans got their independence. He was the first president, so of course, natural choice. We got Thomas Jefferson, number 3, 1801 to 1809. He was the author of the Declaration of Independence, and he also expanded the size of America with the Louisiana Purchase in 1803 to basically double the size of America as it was at the time. We have Teddy Roosevelt, number 26, 1901 to 1909, a century later after Jefferson. He was an avid, staunch conservationist and brought America to the awareness that these beautiful lands in America should be kept preserved and intact, as they were in a period of rapid industrialization when beautiful nature was slowly getting depleted. So, very important president, in my opinion, and the creator of Mount Rushmore sought this president, Teddy Roosevelt, as his own personal pick. And finally, we have Abraham Lincoln, number 16, 1861 to 1865. An obvious pick again. These presidents are on Mount Rushmore for a reason. This guy, he was president probably at the most troubling of times in the nation. He sought the Union to stay intact, and through the Civil War, he was victorious. He kept the Union as one country, and for that, These are those 4 Mount Rushmore presidents that people know very, very well around here in South Dakota. So, who was the man behind Mount Rushmore? Sadly, it would be fun to say, oh, named after the guy who built it, Rushmore. No, that was a different guy who happened to just visit here. The name stuck, but Gutzon Borglum was a man from a Danish Mormon family who grew up in this frontier area of America. And later in life, he made it his life work after seeing the natural beauty that was here in the Black Hills of South Dakota to memorialize the American legacy on stone. So in 1927, he began work on Mount Rushmore, one head at a time. It took over 400 workers working in very dangerous conditions high above the ground on the side of these mountains. And it took 14 years. Because of the Great Depression, it took a long time to gather the funds necessary, but they made do with the money that they had. And in 1941, it was, well, complete, but abruptly completed. The original plan was vastly different than the Mount Rushmore you see today. Originally, the plan was for not just the heads of the presidents to be shown on this rock, but also from the shoulders down. And you see it kind of with Washington, but none of the other presidents have the rest of their bodies. It's just all their faces smushed together. Must be uncomfortable for those other 3. Washington gets to sit out prominently in front of all the others, while everybody else is, head to head. Must be uncomfortable up there. As if the problems weren't enough for the construction of Mount Rushmore. Gutzon Borglum suddenly died in 1941, leaving his son Lincoln to resume the work that had to be done left. And then the US got into World War II, and that pretty much abandoned all hope for continuation of this project. So it was officially completed, was a massive success. You see 2+ million annual tourists here in Mount Rushmore today. So it's nothing like an unfinished project, it's just that it went on a different course towards its completion. Although Mount Rushmore National Memorial is a place anybody in America should visit, it's one of those bucket list destinations, it does come with its bit of controversy. So these faces were carved from the Black Hills. And the Black Hills were a region in America that the Lakota Sioux, the native people, found very sacred. So when the Americans came in and decided, hey, we're going to just put some faces of our leaders on the mountains, they were met with a little bit of disdain from the native people. Rightfully so. I mean, to be fair to their perspective, who would want their sacred mountainside blown up just so that a government which they deemed oppressive could glorify their leaders? Oh, wow. This is probably the most clear view, not just a clear view, but also peaceful view. There are so many people here, so many tourists. You could barely get a clear shot without someone coming in saying, hey, we're next, let's take a photo after you. Oh, actually, can you take our photo? Well, we are back at the start with a great view of Mount Rushmore and a little amphitheater here. We have circled the presidential trail. That was the trail we were going on through this whole day here in Mount Rushmore National Memorial. And to conclude, I'm just going to say this. This is America's shrine of democracy. The U.S. is not really known for being a country to glorify its leaders with giant statues, but this might be the closest thing we have in America to it. You see Washington, Jefferson, Roosevelt, Lincoln, all with their great accomplishments and contributions toward this country, and it's a great way to honor them and the country that has developed as a result of these 4 people. I think this was definitely a necessary debut into South Dakota. The Mount Rushmore State, of course. We got to start it off here. We'll be in South Dakota for a couple more days, and we'll just see where that takes us. So, here at this great amphitheater, looking above at Mount Rushmore. Hopefully these four faces are happy with us on our adventures. More travels to come. I will see you at the next location.